thank you if you responded to our Back to Church survey. All of your answers really helped us know where you stood at a comfort level and also some things you expected us to do, as well as some things you might do personally in a way just to protect yourself and be safe in the midst of these crazy times. So we really appreciate that. Also, thanks for joining us on our Q&A. Hopefully we have worked out all of the bugs and technical issues and you can hear me now. So with that said, there's a few things I want to say up front to you as a church, especially about this time. And then I'll read kind of a summary of what most of your questions were. And then I'll let you know a little bit more about what decisions we've made. First thing I wanted to remind you of is that church was never closed. Buildings were closed for a time. Public gatherings were closed for a little bit of time, but our freedom to worship Jesus is in Jesus. It's in Christ, and there's absolutely no government that can take that away. Like many of our brothers and sisters around the world, though, in a very much smaller scale, some of the logistics and pragmatics of how we could gather together have been restricted. But ours was for the sake of safety. It wasn't at all because of persecution like theirs. And so we are still so blessed in that we could have the freedom to do that. But our freedom primarily is in Jesus. And no restrictions, no social distancing, neither death nor life nor anything in all creation can separate us from the love of God that is ours in Christ. And we are free in Him to worship Him. Now, we have followed some guidelines that have been asked of us by some authorities based off of certain biblical principles. So I want to read those right now to you. The first is that we want to submit to the governing authorities over us because, as Romans 13 says, they were placed there by God. And so we're going to follow some of the things that they say. Number two, we have a responsibility to love our neighbor by looking out for their physical well-being as well as their spiritual well-being. That's just part and parcel with what Christians do. It's not just sharing the gospel, it's trying to help one another. And this is a way that we love our neighbor, our own congregation, but also those around us. Number three, we must choose to sacrifice for the sake of brothers and sisters who see differently on issues that are gray areas, falling under a matter of one's conscience. Now that falls under what Paul will say, eating food sacrificed to idols in 1 Corinthians 8. Some had a conscience that they went, hey, I can do this. It wasn't really sacrificed to any kind of God that doesn't exist. I can have the food. Others would say, I have a hard time accepting that, and it made them uncomfortable. And so Paul instructed the church that really on both ends, we need to not judge one another, but understand that this is a matter of one's conscience. Not, well, you choose what you want to do and I'll choose what I want to do, and then we'll both be okay. Instead, it's a matter of conscience and really the other person's conscience, so we need to be most considerate of. He says a similar thing in Romans 14 as well. So it's not our own conscience, but others. Number four, we will do nothing out of personal opinions, but we will look out to the interests of others. This comes out of Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. I want to go ahead and read it real quick. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. And let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. And that's a self-sacrificial mind in us that is also in Jesus, as Philippians 2 continues to explain. So I want to lay down a few guiding principles for this Q&A session before we get going into the rest of it. First, this is not a place for political discussion. So we're not going to talk about politics with that. I'm not going to talk about politics with that. We're not going to talk about some conspiracy theories and stuff with that. Just getting that out of the way now. And this is also not a place that we're going to pit one church against another or say this church has started something and this church has started this, so what about us? One thing I have learned in listening to a ton of different voices that are in leadership across the board in our denomination, as well as in other places, is that all churches have to make decisions that are best for their specific congregation. No template or timeline is universal across the board to every church. Also wanted to let you know that prudence and patience, neither of which are ever discouraged in the Bible, undergird much of what we have discussed as a church staff and some of the things we've decided. listening to as many voices and guidelines and whatnot as we can, including your feedback from the survey. Without letting the government dictate our worship practices, we have set out 4 phases that we believe are best for our congregation's spiritual and physical and social well-being. So hopefully now you can hear me. We've just scooted the microphone a little bit closer, so maybe that will be working too. I'm also talking a little loud. So if you missed all that, I'll email it to you. Here's a summary of what your responses were to our questions. 1, when will we be able to meet in person? What about a service outside, like in the parking lot or a field? What about at-risk populations? What will childcare look like? Will we have worship care? What about congregational singing? What about singing in the choir? Will we have a limited number of seats available and have to turn people away? What is the process for coming back with worship, Sunday school, childcare, Bible study? What are the cleaning procedures for the church? And then somebody threw out a theological question on how do you view Revelation? Are you a premillennialist, postmillennialist, amillennialist, etc.? I don't think we'll get to that one tonight, but I'll save it for another time. So most of these I'll answer in rolling out the 4 phases in broad terms of what it will look like for us to get back together as a church. But some of them I'm just going to go ahead and answer right up front. So when will we meet in person? As far as a specific date goes, we have not set one. And that's in large part because of some of the responses to the surveys. We've got church members across the board really on this, from one end of the spectrum to the other. And there's varying degrees too of the seating capacity that people would feel comfortable with, some of the cleaning guidelines that people would feel comfortable with, masks, no masks, and things like that. Practically speaking, we would want and really need hand sanitizing stations. Those were purchased a while back, but as you would imagine, we're on back order and won't even be here till the beginning of next month. So as far as a specific date, we haven't set one because there are still some steps we have to get in place before we can just start meeting back together again. Additionally, one of the main markers that came across in the survey from you all was that you would feel more comfortable coming back together whenever there are fewer number of coronavirus cases near you. Now, if you look at the stats in Parker County, yes, there are a number of people who have recovered from the virus, but there is still the same number of people, if not a little bit more, who are new cases. And so that kind of spiked like everybody else, and Parker County's plateaued a little bit. And until that starts to decrease, we really don't think that we'll be able to set a specific date. So that in mind, we're waiting for it to taper off, especially as other places have reopened, as well as some of the things that we can get set up here, trying to figure out live streaming. Can we do that? Trying to figure out cleaning things and hand sanitizing stations and all of that. So we're getting those things in place so that when we feel it's time to set a date, man, we can do it pretty quick. Somebody asked, what about a service outside, like in the parking lot or in the field that we have? It's a good idea, and in theory it could work because we do some things like Trunk or Treat where we set up a stage and we have a sound system. But one thing we have learned from doing that at Trunk or Treat is that our sound system isn't quite beefy enough for doing it outside. And since there is no Radio Shack around the corner, we don't have an FM transmitter to be able to transmit things to a blank radio station and do kind of like a drive-in church, like a drive-in movie used to be. Plus, if we try to order one on Amazon, they're not available because everybody beat us to the punch. So as far as doing a service outside, while that might help with some of the social distancing, we just don't have the capabilities to do that in a way that would actually be beneficial to getting the sound out. Another one was about congregational singing and what about choir? Choir would be one of the later things that can come back in, but as far as congregational singing goes, that will come into how we have to social distance inside of the sanctuary. 6 feet is a normal thing if you're walking and talking next to people, but when you sing, you're projecting spit particles a little bit farther. Technically, I think it's aerosol particulates, so I'll say that instead. But that creates a wider range that you need to distance yourself from other people, because when you sing or when you scream or when you project, that's what you have to do. That's why sporting events and concerts are all having to be canceled, because of how loud people get. So with singing, we're taking that into consideration. My vote was to pass out kazoos I don't think that will actually fly. Jake is for that as well, but I thought, hey man, the wax paper in there's like a filter, but I don't think we'll do that. Anyway, cleaning procedures for the church. Kimberly does an excellent job. Thank you, Kimberly. She's been doing a really great job cleaning and disinfecting things with the few of us that are here on staff. That's, again, something we would have to start looking at different guidelines we might need to follow in addition to what she already is doing, as well as the timeline that we can do that, as well as do we have to hire more people or ask some volunteers to come and help clean in the midst of it. So those are some specific ones I needed to answer. The others I think will get covered as I roll out some of these phases. So what are our phases for meeting in person? 4 big, broad spectrum phases. Phase 1, whenever the date is, would be meeting back together for corporate worship. That would also include online Sunday school. I'll talk some details about that in a minute. Phase 2, down the road, would be we start doing worship care with the worship service so that there's childcare available. Phase 3 would be we start meeting back on campus for Sunday school on Sunday morning. And then phase 4 would be a chance for us to start reintroducing age-graded ministries, kids ministry, student ministry things, other Bible studies and ministries that we have outside of Sunday morning. Hopefully you can kind of see the pattern. We're trying to limit the number of people and the amount of interaction in a smaller setting until it seems to be a little bit safer to do that, as well as the frequency at which we're having people coming on campus. We want to make sure we have time to clean adequately in between, or let anything that's sitting on a surface that we happen to miss die out if that's possible. So doing that a week apart helps with it. Now, I don't have a lot of details on phases 2 through 4 because those are down the road, but one thing I do want to say is realistically looking at this, to roll these 4 phases out, each one would probably last for the span of about 3 months, best we can guess. That seems to be the general rule that's following some of the things that are suggested from churches and from some other leaders. Again, no template's universal, but following some things like that. It makes sense to do something for a few months and see how it goes. And then we can introduce the next thing for a few months and see how it goes. So if you start to think about that, 3 months for each phase, and it's 4 phases, this is a year-long process for us to eventually get back to 90% of what we were already doing. So keep that in mind. With that said, here's some details we've fleshed out for phase 1. As far as corporate worship would go, we would have to have limited entrance points into the church with proper social distancing. That means you're not coming in any door that you want, but we'd really focus everybody down coming into the Welcome Center only. If we have any greeters, they would be have masks on and would simply be a living doorstop, holding it open, not shaking hands, doing things like that. If they aren't doing that, they'd be standing inside just saying, hey, here's where you can go to the sanctuary, maybe even doing a little bit of traffic control so we don't have a congested area upon entering. That also means that in the hallway going in and out of the sanctuary, we would kind of create a 2-lane road that would have 2-way traffic so that you're going into the sanctuary on the right, and if you're coming out, you're on the other side to go to the restroom or anything like that. So we would create those. We would also have to mark off designated seating areas inside of the sanctuary that you could sit at, and when you enter, then you would have to be waiting in line and have a deacon directing you to the section in which you can sit. Now, I know what that means for a Baptist church. You wouldn't get your normal seat, and as much of a travesty as that would be for a lot of us, I think we can put that aside and for the sake of everybody else sit in a different location. You might even find a new location that you like. You might could hear better or hit the air conditioning a little bit better. Who knows? What that would look like as far as distancing people in the pews, if we're singing, think of it kind of like if you look at a die where you have 5 dots on it. So on one pew, you could have a family unit on one end and a family unit on the other end. Then since we need more than 6 feet, we would skip a pew, and then on the next pew, a family unit in the center of the pew, skip a pew. On the next one, you'd have family units on either end. As it gets to each section, you would alternate that so that you've got appropriate distancing and not somebody sitting on the edge of one pew and the edge on the next pew. So when you start to do that, that severely limits the number of people that we can fit inside of our sanctuary. We've even talked, how can we distance people in the choir loft? There may be some choir members and their spouse or families while still distancing them. You would have a weird view of the back of my head and a growing bald spot during the sermon, but that would be able to get a few more people in. So that would limit some of the amount of people that we do. Now, once we mark that off and start counting how many can we actually have, we would have to set a limit to the number of people that could come, and we would do e-tickets where you would have to register online through Google Forms or Eventbrite or something like that, just so that we could do a little bit of crowd control and know if we've reached our max capacity for how many people we can sit. That would also let us know as a staff if we have a lot of folks wanting to get in, if there's a need for us to try to do a second service, which domino affects a whole lot of other things. Do we do it on Sunday? Can we clean in between? Do we do it another day during the middle of the week? We don't know. So that still would just let us know. The simplest thing to do is when we start getting a number by registering online, limiting that number, and then see if we have a need for a second service. We would encourage those of you who are considered an at-risk population to continue to stay home and to worship with us online. We don't want you to at all feel obligated or pressured to come back to church just because we would open up the building and meet for corporate worship. We also don't want you to feel like you're disconnected from that. But if you're an at-risk population, meaning if you're over the age of 65, or if you are immunocompromised, or if you have young children, since we won't have worship care, if your kids are small and are at risk because of that, or your kids would have a difficult time sitting during a service, I promise we would try to shorten it, maybe the sermons even, then we would ask you or encourage you to stay home, but we wouldn't make that a requirement. We would just really encourage you to do that for your own safety as well as that of others. That would help limit some of the numbers that we would have, but not a guarantee. We would continue to record the services like we have been doing, although it would all be live right then instead of right now. You don't know this, but we're all doing bits and pieces throughout about an hour and a half to 2 hours on Thursday afternoons. We are pre-recording it. I haven't worked a Sunday in months because I've been doing it early ahead of time. But what we would do is still record that whole thing, and then it might be a day or two before it's on YouTube, depending on when we can get it rendered and uploaded. So that creates, in our mind, a little delay. And really, I kind of think if you're home and you're wanting to worship online, you're missing when everybody else is together. So we also, though, began to look at what would it take to live stream. This is a pretty basic setup we've got right now to do this. And so we don't even know all the details to live stream, what it would take to do that. We might be okay just propping up a camera or a phone, but to maybe do it to where it looks a little bit better resolution for you at home, that might take some more equipment that we don't have or don't have the money for right now. So either way, we would at least continue to record it and post it as soon as we possibly could. Worst case scenario in that regard, you might be a week behind on the sermons, but you could at least watch on Sunday morning when everybody else is. We would also limit the number of touch points inside of the church. Propping doors or holding doors open would help in that. If we do any bulletins or sermon notes and worship guides, those would be placed in some designated seating areas by a volunteer with a mask on and gloves, just so that we're all not grabbing things. We would do offering boxes or even offering buckets that are placed by the exits so that you could drop that off instead of passing the plate around. We would do the prepackaged Lord's Supper. Thankfully, I ordered some of those and have enough to get us through probably about 2 rounds of the Lord's Supper right now, where it's an individual package that you peel open the top for the cracker and another top for the juice, and we could pre-place those out as well so we're not passing a plate or anything. We would even probably take out the hymnals and the Bibles and the pencils from the back of the pew. I know some of you would have to bring your own pen to church. It's unfathomable. And I hope you'd bring your own Bible too, but those would be gone just so that we don't have a lot of communal areas that are teaching. So then when we get through the service, that would be shorter because we're taking away some of the elements, like the offering isn't being passed around. We would probably limit some of the singing. We would also maybe shorten the sermon if we could just get that preacher to shut up. Maybe we could do that. And then to leave, we would have to dismiss row by row so we don't bottleneck and totally make void any kind of practice of social distancing that we have done. As you can see, once you start to push the domino of, hey, let's meet back for worship, that knocks a whole lot of different things over and a whole lot of different steps and phases that we have to consider and think about what to do. In the midst of that, another thing we would do is really push for Sunday school to be online. Some of you are already doing that and doing a really good job at it. I think the way that we might be able to help as a staff is better equip you if you're already doing it, and if you haven't, really help you get it set up and done on a regular basis. What that would look like is that it needs to take a little bit of a different format. An online lesson might not be able to be the same as if you're sitting in a room, because even though you're on Zoom, you might not have all the same interaction. So realistically, it needs to be a little bit shorter, put together a little bit different. So there might be an altered format, but I think it would help if we said, here's the set day for Sunday school, but your class can find a flexible time in the midst of that day to do it, so that everybody knows we're doing it on this day. And then potentially something the staff talked about was, during that first phase, maybe let's say if we feel comfortable, we can do once a month just a special prayer night here at the church. We still have to follow a lot of the same things about entering and exiting and seating spaced out, but a guided prayer time up at the church building, that's something that we talked about doing as well. So I think that answers a lot of the questions that we have had. At least I hope that answers a lot of the questions that we have done. I do want to remind you, you can text in questions if you just reply to the text that was sent out at the beginning of this, or you can continue to fill out a Google form, or you can comment on Facebook, and we're watching all of that, or even on YouTube. We're watching all of that to see if anyone has texted anything in. So if you do, just give us a second and let us see if you've asked any questions. Okay. So now I'm going to wait about 30 seconds because we've got a delay on that. Let's see. Anything yet? Okay. I do have one, but I think it's beyond my pay grade. So I have a question. Any question? How do you integrate secant cubed in calculus? I have no idea. Beyond my pay grade. My math ended freshman year of college, maybe sophomore year of college. The only numbers I really know now are Bible references and perhaps a church budget and a few phone numbers by memory. So sorry, David. To answer one question, what do I think about, how do I view Revelation? Am I a premillennialist, postmillennialist, amillennialist? What's the millennium? Well, it's 1,000-year reign, and I think obviously Christ will show up. My understanding is he'd show up before the 1,000-year reign. Now, as far as when is the church raptured in the midst of that, yeah, who knows? I don't know if there's really any that are a strong case for that. Some would say because the church isn't mentioned specifically after a certain point, then maybe they are not there during the tribulation. I hope that's the right one, that we are saved from that. However, a post-trib date of the rapture could make sense too, because the church does suffer on this earth until the new heavens and the earth are there. Maybe a mid-tribulation rapture, that could be something that happens as well. I think in terms of a lot of things in Revelation and the end times, some of that comes up to what makes the most sense to some folks. There are some that I would say are definitely no. Here's one question that I just got. When childcare resumes during phase 2, will children be expected to wear masks? That's a detail we haven't set yet. That's something that I know Emily is starting to research. Okay, what are schools requiring? What are schools doing for guidelines? I know right now you go to a doctor's office or anything like that, anybody over the age of 2, children are required to wear masks. But here's part of my thinking. This may change, so don't hold me to this, but if we're not asking the adults who are coming into the church building that will essentially be in the same proximity to wear masks, then I don't know if we can ask or require children to wear masks. It might be that if you're a volunteer and a teacher, you should wear a mask for the kids, but we would do the best we can to keep that distance appropriate to the kids. And hopefully by that point in time in phase 2, things will have begun to die down. Cases will have begun to taper off. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a vaccine by that point in time. but I don't know right now that we would really require that. And so that's the best I can give you now. Good question. Jake, any questions coming in on YouTube or Facebook? On the interweb, do we have any questions?
Not so far.
How about the Twitter? We didn't even ask you to post on the Twitter. On Twitter, I just like to say the Twitter. So,
fun fact,
we do have a Twitter.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, at FBC Willow Park, that is our Twitter handle. So we do have that.
Question.
Okay, what's the question?
During phase 1, we won't be required to wear masks, right?
Won't be required to wear masks, right? Yeah, we didn't even talk about requiring people to wear masks during that. If we're doing social distancing, fine. I think that's something that we would leave up to the individual based off a matter of their conscience. Would they feel comfortable coming and wearing a mask? Great. Maybe we could have a masked section so that those who are in masks are further away from those who are without masks. That's something we could consider. However, if you are a volunteer doing some of the greeting, or you're a deacon, which means you will come in close proximity with a lot of people by holding a door open or by designating where they should sit, I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to ask you, in that case, to put a mask on for your sake, because you'll be close and exposed to a lot of people, as well as for the sake of others. So. Hopefully that answered it. Any other questions coming in? Okay, I got no more texts. We got no more questions. So I'm going to wait a few seconds because I know there's a little bit of a delay in this to see if anybody has any more questions to text or type in.
How can we get your sermons to those who don't have internet?
How can we get the sermons to those who don't have internet? That's a great question. If you have an extra like $60 a month, pay for them to have internet. That could work. I'm just kidding. I can talk to Sam about that because there is a way that we can get either the video, I think, in a format that they could watch it, perhaps on a DVD. I know they might not have internet, but they might still have a computer, so we might be able to get them on a jump drive that we could then give to them on a regular basis. Another option may be, Sam and I talked about this at the beginning, is that he could extract the audio and upload it onto SoundCloud, where we upload all of the sermon audio recordings now. Again, that doesn't help because they don't have internet. However, if we can do that, then that makes it easier to at least put it on a CD. So if you, whoever asked that question, if you will email me which format, if they want video or if they want audio, then we can start talking about how to make that possible, because we want as many people as possible to feel connected to the church and part of the church as well. I'm going to wait a few more seconds in case any more questions come in. Was that texted or was that on Facebook?
Facebook.
Cool.
Thanks everyone who's joined in on this.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. It's kind of neat to I wish I could see everybody. I almost did a Zoom deal just so I could have a tiny little picture of your faces all over my computer screen, but we decided this might be a little bit better format. So, all right, I have no more questions. We got another one?
No.
Okay. Trying to see if we got any more. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, then we'll go ahead and end this. I want to say a couple things in conclusion. If you do have more questions, email them to us or follow that same Google form. I'll erase all of the current questions, and that way anything that comes in will start again. This may be something that we do on a fairly regular basis. In fact, Jake and I were talking about doing kind of a Q&A with the pastor or the staff before any of this happened. And then this has forced our hand to say, let's buy a camera, let's get a microphone, and now we're able to see that works. So it may be something that we do again as well, whether that is in a live format like this, or you submit questions and I take a longer time to answer each one and we post those as a video. That would make us totally cool, like all of my favorite ministries that have cool websites. So anyway, that being said, I wanted to share just a couple final things with you. This whole deal has provided a unique opportunity for us as a church to kind of stop and hit the pause on things and look at every single ministry and every single event that we do. That's something that we should do on a regular basis, and we really try to do, but sometimes in different seasons throughout the year, it gets to be so fast-paced that we forget to almost evaluate what we did and see how we can improve some things, even though we try. So because we've kind of had to take everything off the table and do the most bare bones essential, as we begin to re-enter those things, it is an opportunity for us to reevaluate what we do, to reevaluate how we do different things, to reevaluate why we do certain ministries and certain events, and to approach them with a corrected intent and a new purpose, if that needs to be the case, and to approach them with a fresh heart so that we are doing them for the right reasons and not just because we have always done it. And maybe even, obviously, like we're doing now, to think outside of the box because we have to. And we have been so much more aware of the fact that we are ministering to a culture that is ever changing. So join with us, church. Let's ask God for wisdom as we begin to move forward and think about how to approach things. And then the other thing that I think it has provided an opportunity for is to create a greater longing in us to worship the Lord together. Not a longing to be back in the pew, not a longing to be back as a church family, although that is true because we want to see each other. Some of you that I have seen face to face, I'll be honest, it's really hard not to shake your hand or give you a hug. Whenever I see you, it takes a lot of restraint on my part to do that. I'm kind of like our mission partner Sean Lynch in that regard. He and I have texted each other virtual hugs. Don't ask me how that works, but there's an emoji for it, so it works. Anyway, not just a longing to be back at church in the building, but a longing because we realize the importance and the significance and the joy of corporate worship. Now think to the small scale of our church, that longing, and then take that to the grander scale of an innumerable amount of people who believe in Jesus, worshiping Him in the new heavens and the new earth. That's the picture we get in Revelation 4 and 5. Man, that ought to spur us on to love and good works like Hebrews 10:24 says. That ought to make us want to make disciples so that we can see the thing that we want, that we know we have, others want too, and we have the opportunity to bring them in the midst of that. So continue to pray for us as we're praying for you, church, and thank you so much for all the ways that you have prayed for us. I hope you enjoyed this and this answered some of your questions, and we'll see you next time.